every single holiday I ever went on was a science adventure.
I can't think of any more human activity than conducting science experiments.
The game I play is a very interesting one. It's imagination in a tight straitjacket.
The beauty of a living thing is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together.
What I always think should be the basis of education is not answers, but questions. We should teach kids how to question.
This is BLab Quotes. My name is Amit Siddiqui. In this week's episode, I got a chance to talk to Dr Vivian Cumbo, who's a postdoc at Macquarie University. Her story is quite interesting because as a child, she grew up in a family of science educators. Her parents were these educators that were passionate about showing her how cool the world was when it was viewed through the lens of science. Vivian is a marine biologist who has looked at how coral respond to the changing temperatures of the ocean caused by climate change. Now, we also talk about her journey after her PhD, the lessons that she learned, and the challenges she has yet to face. I enjoyed this conversation a lot because I learned quite a bit from Vivian, and I hope you guys do too.
Okay, I'm Vivian Cumbo. I'm currently doing a postdoc at Macquarie University, and I'm working on oysters at the moment, looking at their response to temperature and also looking at potential ways to restore oyster populations in urbanised environments.
Okay, nice. I suppose before we get into your research, because I like to leave that towards the end, what I'm curious about is learning more about you and your journey.
Yep.
Were you always interested in science? As a young girl, were you predisposed towards it?
Most definitely, actually, because my parents are both science teachers, so they're both high school science teachers, which meant that every single holiday I ever went on was a science adventure. We would be going camping or anywhere we went, we would be driving along, and my dad's got a background in geology and physics, and my mum's got a background in chemistry and botany, so we'd be driving along and the car would just be pulled over all of a sudden for them to show me some rock formations or some plants, and so I felt like I was always learning something about the world we live in, which was a really good experience.
Wow, so you had two parents, both of them were science educators. So geology and physics, and your mum was botany and chemistry.
Yeah. So
you had a good exposure to sort of all different types of field of science. It wasn't just one specific field.
Yeah, pretty much. Interestingly, not so much biology, which is where I ended up heading. But I got to learn a lot of different how a lot of different things worked from a very young age, which is good.
Wow, I kind of envy you because both my parents were educators, but my dad was a historian and my mum was a high school teacher, but they weren't scientists. They had a deep fascination with science actually, but they never had the opportunity to study it. So you're like I don't know, if I could imagine Carl Sagan and his wife, if they had a kid, that's exactly what they would do, sort of upbringing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. It was really good, and it meant the type of things that we actually did when we were kids. One of my brother's birthday parties when we were young was just everyone coming around, and my mum just did a whole bunch of different chemistry experiments where there was explosions or pretty lights or things like that, and you can imagine a group of kids just absolutely loving that. So it was awesome.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So your parents were your biggest inspiration for you to get into science?
Yeah, definitely. I had a lot of their support to do that. And the biggest moment for me to know that I wanted to do marine science was actually on a holiday with them when I was 14, and we drove from Sydney up to Cape Tribulation. It was a 6-week trip, and at the Whitsundays we were sailing around the Whitsundays for a week, and I jumped in the water and saw corals for the first time, and it took my breath away I've always thought the ocean was beautiful and the marine environment was beautiful, but just seeing the tropical reef ecosystem, it was just incredible. And seeing corals, I just knew that this is what I wanted to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
At 14, you had that realization.
Yeah, and obviously along the way you think you want to do many other things, but then, when I got to choose my university degree, that's what I chose, was marine science.
In high school, so once you saw the beauty that there was in the coral reef, was that the first time you had seen it?
That was the first coral reef I'd ever seen, yeah.
And it really affected you.
Yeah.
And so how did that affect you at school? Did you decide to change your units, for example, in year 11 and year 12, where you can specialize? Did you go towards the
interestingly, they didn't, no, and I didn't actually even do biology in high school. I did chemistry and I did physics in year 11, but I had a lot of units, so I dropped physics in year 12, much to my dad's dismay. And so I did really start doing the sciences once I went to university. I had my chemistry background, which was great for the first few years of uni, and then I just did biology, and there's lots of maths and stuff as well.
I saw that you did a bachelor's in microbiology and oh my god, I'm forgetting the second
and marine biology.
And marine biology,
yeah.
Sorry. That's quite a mixture. What made you want to mix them two together?
Well, when I started, I wanted to do initially marine science, and I really loved chemistry, and I actually went into biochemistry. But come second year at uni, I started realising I didn't really like biochemistry as much. We were learning a lot of cycles at the time, and I was just like, this is really not for me. And I was doing within my marine science degree, environmental microbiology, and I loved it. I just loved the microbiology field, and so I decided to drop my biochemistry major and actually do microbiology instead. And I loved it, and it actually meant, like, I did a lot of different microbiology, not just environmental micro. I did work on viruses and disease and things as well, and it was great. And then when I actually went into honours at uni, I did my honours in marine. It was marine fielders on corals, but it was actually through the microbiology department, because it was more marine microbiology, which was an excellent opportunity for me, because the Dr. Chris Marquis was my supervisor, and he was actually working on corals, and there wasn't many people at my university at the time, because it was in Sydney, that was working on corals, and I got this really amazing project with him, and we got to go up to Townsville during coral spawning and collect corals, and it was an amazing experience, and it actually is what put me on that path to then be able to do a PhD in corals as well, because of the people that I met up in Townsville.
Right, so the connections that you established at Townsville set you up to doing a PhD in that field.
Yep, pretty much.
What made you want to? So at university you did microbiology and marine biology, or marine science. What made you want to get into research?
I guess for me, I'm always very inquisitive. I always want to know why about things, and that's probably partly because growing up, I was always I would always ask why. My parents actually usually had a lot of answers for why. I actually have a running joke that whenever I'm travelling now and there's some rock structure somewhere, I just want to 1-800 my parents to find out what it is.
Oh, wow.
And so that definitely led me on the path to research. But when I finished my honours, I admittedly didn't know what I wanted to do, and I just packed my bags. I knew I wanted to work on the reef, and I packed my bags and drove up to Townsville with nothing lined up, no job or anything, and door knocked at James Cook University, and I got a research assistant's position for 3 months with Dr. Andrew Baird, and this was over coral spawning. So we got to, this is coral spawning just here actually, I got the experience of working out on the reef at Orpheus Island and out on the Mid-Shelf Reef through AIMS, the Australian Institute of Marine Science, during this 3-month period. And it was it was so much fun diving every day, collecting coral samples, going back into the lab, constructing the experiments, having to build stuff, and so it was really hands-on, really practical, really outdoorsy, and I loved it. And it was during that 3-month period, discussing this with my boss at the time, that he was like, well, have you ever thought about doing a PhD? And I was like, well, yeah, if this is what I get to do, then that sounds great. So I applied for a scholarship and was fortunate enough to get it, and set me on my career path.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you took this big risk of just showing up and just knocking on a person's door and hoping that it's going to work out.
Yep. Pretty much. I did have one other option. Like I did door knock a lot. I was there for 2 months unemployed, actually. But at the same time, I was being interviewed through the hospital for a microbiology lab technician position as well. And on the same day that I got the research assistant position, to be a marine scientist, I also got the lab technician position. And it's interesting whenever I think back into my past and be like, oh, how different my life could have been if I took the other option.
Right.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. There are, I think, these moments in our lives where if you zigged instead of zagging, your life would have been so different.
Yep.
I mean, I have that. I think 4 years ago I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that changed the trajectory of my life completely. Who I am now would have been so different had I not taken that step. And it seems like that was one of the moments for you.
Yep.
Where had you not taken this opportunity to, or rather, had you taken to work at that lab doing micro stuff, then you would have probably never been here.
Yep. Probably still working in the hospital system.
Probably depressed. Smelling, like I did a microbiology unit, and so I work in the field of biochemistry and molecular biology, and my supervisor is a hardcore biochemist, and he doesn't understand micro, and he goes, I don't understand why people can work with microbes. When you're working with E. coli, you know where they come from. That's where you gotta smell in the lab. Like, fair point.
At least sure some of my microbiology friends would have something to say about that.
That's true. It's not that bad, man. Making drugs with poo bacteria. Oh, that's so cool. I'm ashamed to say this, but I didn't know how coral actually worked. How there was this symbiotic relationship between these two different species. It was only last week when I was talking to my friend about this interview. He's like, "Did you know this?" I'm like, "Dude, that's so cool."
Yep. So obviously, yeah. So corals are in a symbiotic relationship with an algae called Symbodinium, and it's actually called an obligate symbiosis. And what that means is, actually, for corals to survive, they need to have this algae, and that's the algae provides up to 95% of the carbon for corals. So all this...
And it does that through photosynthesis.
Through photosynthesis, yeah, from the sun. And so all this, you've probably heard a lot in the news about these 2 mass bleaching events that have occurred on the Great Barrier Reef, one this year and one last year. And it's actually affected 2/3 of the Great Barrier Reef, which is a huge area, and that's coral bleaching, and that's when the algae is actually expelled from the coral because it lives inside the coral, and so the symbiosis is broken down, and so a lot of the corals are actually dying because of this.
So what causes that breakdown of the symbiosis?
There's many ideas out there of what's causing it, but basically we don't know whether the coral has decided that this symbiosis has become too stressful, or whether the algae's decided just to get out of there because it's not working. But we think it's just like the temperature has created more reactive oxygen species, and so the relationship has just become quite toxic. Simplest way.
So the temperature change in the ocean has created this reactive oxygen. These are just oxygen.
No, this is what happens during photosynthesis, and so there's more reactive oxygen species being created
in the process. Okay, so these algae use, similar to what plants do with their leaves, they have photosynthesis. They produce sugars from sunlight and carbon dioxide and water, I believe.
Yeah. I
am a biochemist. If I get this wrong, shame on me. But essentially, that process could also produce radical oxygen species, which are these oxygen atoms, I should say, that aren't bound with another oxygen, and they have a lone electron. Essentially, all it is just like an oxygen molecule. Imagine your friend who's on meth. Like, it's just a meth version of your friend. So it's super unstable. It will stab people around him and cause a lot of trauma and chaos. So that's when you get a buildup of those methed up oxygens, which you could use that analogy, then it starts to cause a lot of issues between the relationship of those two species. Yeah,
and so of those two organisms, so the symbiosis breaks down, and that's why you see when you're talking about coral bleaching, it's because the corals actually look white, and it's actually because the algae's left their tissue, and so the skeleton is just calcium carbonate, which is obviously quite white, and the colour is, majority of the colour is of coral is from the algae, although obviously the coral brings some of the colour as well, but Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say that's some of my research was actually looking at the early life stages of coral and this symbiotic relationship with the algae, and actually looking more into how, with climate change and with these increases in temperature, what happens with this association between the coral and the algae, but during the establishment of symbiosis. So during when they first take up this algae, is it going to change? Are they taking up algae that are different because they're more heat tolerant, and if they are more heat tolerant, what is this benefiting them at all? Or so that's what some of my PhD work was actually on.
And what were your findings?
We found that the coral larvae would actually establish symbiosis with more heat tolerant algae with increases in temperature, and then this symbiosis would develop more. And I guess what we then hypothesize now is, okay, with increases in temperature, we'll probably see this shift in the corals associating with different algae that are more heat tolerant, and then now more work has to be done to look at, okay, what are the trade-offs for associating with this more heat tolerant algae? And so there's a lot of work being done on that, or has been done on that, to look at.
The coral are actually adapting to the heat and associating themselves with more heat tolerant algae.
You do see shifts in the environment. You do see corals changing with which algae that they associate with, but these permanent differences that I was talking about in my PhD, this would have to be once the temperature is permanently staying at those higher temperatures. So right now we're seeing these mass bleaching events occurring because we're seeing increases in temperature for a period of time, and then the temperature goes down a little bit, but it's always the general trend is it's always rising. Right. And so with incremental rises in sea surface temperature, we think that the association will slowly start to change to more heat tolerant partnerships. Whether they can do it fast enough remains to be seen.
Right. And that appears to be the concern. Can they adapt before the temperature rises to such a degree that it's going to be impossible for them to adapt?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I had this misconception of what caused coral bleaching, and I suppose this is due to my ignorance. And I thought it was the carbon dioxide level. Somehow it changed the acidity of the water, and that affected.
No, that's another thing that can cause bleaching. So the main driver of bleaching, especially the mass bleaching events we've seen all around the world, is always been temperature. It's usually temperature, I should say. But there is also this concern, which is called ocean acidification, and that's like what you said, with more carbon dioxide in the air and being taken up into the water, that's actually decreasing the pH of the oceans. And obviously corals, their skeleton that they make, it's made of calcium carbonate, and so a decline in pH would actually affect the deposition of the skeleton, or more importantly, actually affect these reef systems that we see out in the environment. A lot of the reef structure, the foundations, are old corals that have died, and then more corals grow on top and more corals grow on top. And where there's live coral tissue, the decrease in pH, it doesn't affect the live coral as much because they can regulate their pH. Whereas the foundations of the reef, it's just calcium carbonate, and so the decrease in pH is actually making that dissolve.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not so much the new, but the old.
Yeah, and so you can imagine if you don't have the foundations, it'll
start to collapse.
Yeah.
That is an issue. Okay. I want to go back a bit to your journey, because I think this is... I like to use these interviews as opportunities to not only learn about the person, but also about their field. But going back to your journey, and because I just finished my master's and I'm going into a PhD next year, so you knew you were going to do a PhD following your experience in your honors and the 3-month research, the job that you had as a research assistant.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say I knew I was going to a PhD at the end of my honours. I definitely tried to go well in my honours to keep that as an option open to do a PhD, so I would be eligible for a scholarship. But it wasn't until I did the 3-month research assistant position that I was like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. So
right.
Yeah.
So in your PhD, we spoke a bit about your research. Now the next step, going from a PhD to a postdoc, I saw that you went to California.
Yeah.
How did you decide to go there? Because that's what I'm most interested in right now. Doing a PhD, okay, fine, I kind of see that. In 3 years, I'll finish it. But then the next step is very enigmatic for me. I don't know what lies ahead. And I was hoping you could shed some light on what were the factors that influenced you to go over there, and how did you know to go over there, and what was your experience like?
Well, I guess like everyone, like when you're getting closer to the end of your PhD, you start thinking, oh, how do I make this next step? What do I do next? And there's many different options open to you. You can follow the research path, or you can look at going into industry or anything like that. And for me, I was unsure what I wanted to do. And then this postdoc got advertised on a mailing list that I'm a part of. And it was working on corals and climate change and the early life stages of corals. And I just read it and was like, to me, it seemed like this job had been written for me. Like I didn't know these people at all, but I was like, this job is perfect for me. And then hilariously, my supervisor saw it and forwarded it to me, going, "Has this been written for you?" So I threw my hat in the ring and applied for that, and got it. And so then the next thing was, did I actually want to do this? Did I want to move to California? Did I want to leave Australia and I decided to, yeah. I was like, yeah, this would be a really good experience. We're always told going through our PhDs that it's really good to go and get experience in other labs and do research in other labs. Don't stay in the same university forever. And I did really benefit from my experience in America. I learned a lot of things from going over there, just seeing how different labs operated, and just using different techniques and everything. So I guess I was very fortunate that a job came up right near the end of my PhD that meant that I got the job, and so that's what happened with me. And so yeah, then I just went overseas, and it was I ended up working there for 2 years. 2 years. Yeah.
Were you scared taking that leap?
No, I was excited. I think because I'd packed up my bags and driven up to Townsville with nothing lined up, I was like, yeah, I could do it again. And it wasn't the same. Like, it's definitely when you pack up your bags and move somewhere and then end up doing a degree there, it's very easy to integrate into life there. Whereas moving to America, it was very different. We think they're the same, but they're culturally quite different to us. And also the job, I traveled a lot for the job. So I was in Taiwan and French Polynesia, and literally, like, I started the job in America, and 1 month later I'm running experiments in Taiwan in ocean acidification research that I'd never done before, new techniques. I had master's students with me that I was helping run their experiments, and I think I'd only just managed to in that month that I'd been in America, just managed to find somewhere to live and get a social security number so I could get paid. And then it was like I was off. And then 1 month in Taiwan, back again to America for 2 months, then 2 months in Taiwan. And I did find it very hard to find my feet in America because I was traveling around so much. But I wouldn't change it for the world because I got so many amazing experiences overseas. So yeah.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
That is kind of my hope as well, that I'm going to use my PhD and get into a position that I can travel the world with.
Yeah.
See
or do it in your PhD as well.
Yeah.
I travelled a lot in my PhD as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Where did you go?
Japan and Taiwan, and America as well, actually, for research. Yeah.
That's such a good idea.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of doing a collaboration between here and some university in China, because I'm going there for about 5 months to study Chinese.
Oh wow.
So it'd be good to just go there and talk to some academics and see what they're doing. But yeah, that's one of my goals, and to see that you've utilized that strategy it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So going from doing your postdoc over there and learning as much as you could, why did you decide to come back? Did you always have a plan of, I'm going to come back home to Australia? Why not stay in America or other places?
I guess for me, well, I guess for me, coming back was, I did always want to come back to Australia and do research in Australia. The quality of life in Australia is very good, and the research environment's really collaborative in some instances. In majority of my experience, been quite collaborative here, and so I did know that I wanted to come back, and I actually did another one of those leap of faith things that I do, which was I had 1 more year on my contract in America, but I was fairly certain I wanted to come back to Australia, and I didn't want my boss to not have the opportunity to advertise a year postdoc in America. So I left with a year left so he could advertise a year position there, and I moved back to Australia. Unfortunately, got a job within 4 weeks of being back in Australia, so it worked out well. But yeah, I did know that I wanted to come back. The research environment here is great. We're also paid well, so it's really good, much better than in America. So yeah, I did, and I worked on corals, and I still work on corals, but I went back to the ARC Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies at James Cook University, which is just a hub of activity with coral reef research. So it was really good to go back there.
Okay.
Yeah. And
at the moment you're doing a second postdoc, I believe, yes?
Yeah, now I'm actually onto my third postdoc, and I'm working on oysters now, which was a shift in focus, but more similarities than differences. They're like the reef systems of the temperate environment, like corals are the reef systems of the tropical environment. So this job came up at Macquarie Uni, and I'm initially from Sydney, and I just read it and I was like, this is perfect for me. It's a really exciting position. Oysters are very similar to corals in many ways. They have shells, but corals have skeleton. But with that, they actually build habitat for other organisms to live. So they're called reef-building organisms, and the way they reproduce and everything is very similar to corals. It's broadcast spawning, and there was just so many similarities. I could see myself definitely working on them, and it's been a really nice journey learning all about oysters and all the interesting things about them, because they're a very important food source in Australia. They in New South Wales, they're the biggest primary industry that we have, and so it's good.
Okay. One question I think that comes to mind is, I've heard my supervisor say this and a couple of academics say this, that when you're doing a postdoc, you should always consider how much you're putting in terms of giving them, and also consider what you're going to learn from them. Is that a good way of approaching a postdoc?
Definitely. I definitely think that, and I think with each postdoc I've done that better and better. Like in my first postdoc, because you're just out of your PhD, you just want to be a yes man. You just want to say yes to everything. You want to give as much as you can possibly give, and really impress them, because you're still really new in this field, and to the point where I don't know how much reflection I had during that period, and it wasn't until I went into my next postdoc that I actually started, I guess, creating boundaries. It was like, yes, I will do this, but what are you going to, it's not what are you going to do for me, but it's like, let's work on this way. I'm not just going to say yes and absolutely run myself ragged. I'm going to, and so it's been a good process. And now come the third one, this has been a really enjoyable postdoc, this one actually. So
you've mastered it.
Yeah, I feel like I've mastered it, and I have amazing bosses in this postdoc, which is great. So
nice.
Yeah.
Okay, that gives me hope. Okay. I'm trying to learn from your experience. Okay, yeah. That's really cool. So we've talked about your past, your present. Let's talk a bit about your future. I'm curious, what are your aspirations? What do you want to accomplish with yourself? It could be in any time scale, time frame, big, small, whatever you like.
What do I want to accomplish? Well, I guess for work, the holy grail for most postdocs is to get that lectureship position, that permanent position, and there's obviously not very many of these, and especially if you are looking within just one area, so it's like there's not very many, especially in Sydney at the moment and things like that. So I would love to get a lectureship position, mainly for a number of reasons, not just for the job security, but also I love teaching, and I do get to do a bit of teaching in my postdocs. I get the opportunity to, but to actually develop a course and to be inspiring the younger generation is a really good, really exciting prospect. And so I would really love to do that, and I guess also just teach them teach them the science, but also just teach them that there is many ways of doing things. There's many ways of approaching a problem. There's many ways of approaching almost life even, and there's not just one correct way. So,
okay, that's cool. That's nice.
Yeah.
You mentioned, so your next goal is obviously to get into a permanent position where you're lecturing. I guess this is something that I've been considering, and a lot of my friends who are doing PhDs and masters of, having that job insecurity, I suppose. Is that stressful? Because you come out of a PhD, and the PhD you're kind of working for pennies, and then postdoc, it's considering that you've put about 8 to 9 years of your life, it still doesn't pay very well relative to the end goal. Mm-hmm. Is there stress involved thinking about, is this ever going to work out? What if this never works out? Do you have those sort of thoughts?
Continuously. Maybe I stress more than others, but I think all of the job insecurity is a very common conversation that all postdocs have with each other. The stress of what's going to happen next is very stressful, and it is also tricky because you're moving on in your life as well. So you're making decisions for your life, like buying a house or something, but you don't know whether your job's whether you're going to have a job come a year's time and things like that. So that is a constant stress, and it's always nice. You get into a postdoc, just say it's 3 years long, and the first 2 years are usually pretty good, and then the second that last year ticks on over, you start looking desperately for another job, and you really do have to start looking about a year out, so that you find something that fits well for you, and it's always good, obviously, to do a lot of extracurricular things so that people know you and people know the skills that you have, but it is a constant stress, and it's not just mine. I have had discussions with a lot of postdocs about it.
It just comes with the territory.
Just comes with the territory. But in saying that, I feel like I've had a lot of discussions with people about this that don't work in science, because I just assume it's all about our field that it's like this, but I'm hearing more and more that the world's going in this direction where there is less and less permanent positions, and it's more and more contracts, and so no one's got job security by the sounds of it.
No one's safe.
So if I shifted out of research and did something else, it would probably be the same situation.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. You mentioned extracurricular activities. Obviously you want that to distinguish you from others.
Yep.
Anything in particular
that I do?
Yeah.
I'm doing a podcast right now. No.
Doing a great job.
Well, I try and always do guest teaching or running labs where possible. I take on a lot of interns, so I train a lot of interns that come from France and America and Australia. There's always Year 10 students coming through, things like that. But other things that I'm not as involved in at the moment, but it's being on committees and within the university and helping to run things like that, which I've peeled back on because I'm in the last year of my postdoc, and which is where you really need to knuckle down and get those publications out. So
right. Look for the next job.
Yeah.
Abandon ship. Okay, that's cool. So we talked about your aspirations. Do you have any fears besides the job insecurity? But do you have any fears looking into the future? It could be as specific or as broad as you like.
How political can I get here?
as much as you like. This is...
No. Fears. I guess the biggest fear is for the world is climate change. Like, we all know it exists, and it's and a lot of action is. People are trying to do a lot of action on this, but whether we can do enough or whether we've gone too far down the rabbit hole, I guess is one of the biggest fears. With the bleaching that's happened on the reef, experts are now coming out and saying, well, yes, the reef will never recover to its former glory. And when I'm saying former glory, I mean from 2 years ago. But can we at least maintain the reef now? Can we actually, is there anything that we can do so that it doesn't get worse at such a fast rate? So yeah, that's probably one of the biggest fears is climate change.
Climate change, yeah. No, I totally get it. I have a friend who's working he's the first episode, Sandy, and he's working on building nano cages to eventually, be able to trap carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
And that's one of his fears. Is like, how far do we have to go down the road before we decide to take action?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. It's like I feel like a lot of the population, it has to be directly affecting them, and we can live in a bubble for very easily, and potentially we have gone too far. We don't know. We won't know if we stop emitting carbon dioxide now. There's still this huge bounce back. It's going to keep going up for a while before we start making a difference.
There's a lag.
Yeah.
And we won't know what the outcomes are until the consequences hit us, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay, my very last question, and I promise I'll let you go because I know you have things to do. What would be looking at your journey and reflecting on it, what would be some advice you could pass on to students who are considering following a similar journey, even if it's not in marine biology but other fields of science? If you could go back, if you could provide some advice, what would it be?
Definitely, if you want to do research, choose something that you enjoy working on, because research, there is many amazing times, there's many very enjoyable things, but then there's also a lot of sitting in front of the computer or crunching the data and things like that. So as long as you have a joy and an enjoyment for what you're working on, it makes it so much easier. That's one, and follow your gut. I think one of the biggest things is just, if something isn't working, don't just follow your gut and what you actually want to do. I guess that's what I did in America when I had that postdoc. I learned a lot and it was very enjoyable, and I knew I had 1 year left, but I didn't know how much I was going to get out of that final year, and I thought I could probably go elsewhere and learn a lot more. So yeah, take chances, follow your gut, but do what you want to do.
Love what you do. Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Vivian. I appreciate it, and I've enjoyed this conversation.
Okay, thanks very much for having me.
What a fucking sick shot. Cool.
I think we should talk about that leaps of faith thing.
About her just
jumping, maybe.
Jumping and not worrying about the consequences and hoping that it'll work out. That's pretty crazy. That, it takes a lot of courage to go into a situation not knowing what the outcomes are going to be and just saying, who cares? I'm just going to try to make it work.
Yeah, taking just a giant leap of faith, take some guts.
Yeah, Assassin's Creed style.
Yeah, and you must be like pretty confident, I think, to be able to do that, so it's good.
Yeah, and she did it. What she said, she did it after her honors. She decided to go up and work as a research assistant. But that happened only by knocking on people's doors. And she said she actually knocked on quite a few people's doors. I should have maybe probed a bit more about that. But it's interesting how, like, she wanted something and she said, well, it's like those guys that move to LA and want to make, you want to
make it big, yeah. In a country overseas that's really different.
That takes a lot of balls, man. It's not easy to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was interesting that it seemed to have paid off for her, though. Everyone that she's taken, I think it was moving up north in Australia and then moving over into the US as well, another big move. And then even coming back, I think it was probably, even though it was kind of coming back to home, was another big move where she just kind of took the opportunity when it presented itself and left.
Yeah, and she said that, because she did it the first time when she moved up to Queensland and did that. Was it Queensland?
I think it was, yeah.
We could be wrong. But she said that because she did that once, it was easier to do it again for her postdoc.
Yeah, I guess you get some confidence from it paying off, and it gives you that courage to try it again.
Yeah, and you get comfortable with uncertainty. You realize that a lot of the fear and the uncomfort that's involved is just in your own mind.
Yeah.
When you actually go through it, you're like, oh, it's just cool. It's not like as difficult as I thought it would be.
Yeah, exactly. That's excellent. Another thing I thought which was really interesting and resonated with me a bit was when she talked about her childhood interest in science and where it came from with her parents and things like that. So my parents actually weren't scientists; they were like teachers like yours, but not scientists. And
so were they science teachers?
No, not science teachers either.
What did they do?
Both primary school teachers.
Oh.
Yeah. So my mum actually taught high school as well for a little bit, English and history, I believe. But yeah.
She went back to primary school?
Yeah, went back to primary.
I don't blame her.
Yeah.
She's got to put up with people like my nephew over here.
Yeah.
No, my nephew's sitting over
tough.
here. He's giving us dirt. He's like, man, I'm awesome. What are you on about? He's 15. Yeah, kids at that age can be really tough to work with.
Yeah. I don't know. I reckon really young kids are sometimes really tough to work with too. I don't know how people put up with a classroom of kindy kids, to be honest. Yeah,
that's tough. I have a niece, two nieces and a nephew around like from 5 to about 7 or 8. I love playing with them. I love, like, my niece, she had some issues with like math. She wasn't getting it.
Yeah.
And then I sat down with her like an hour. And I think at any level that you're at, so whether it's primary school or high school or university, when you see students wanting to learn, that's when it becomes fun for
you. Exactly. So that's the most rewarding thing.
Dude. And it was so nice just sitting with her and trying to do additions and trying to use big numbers, like adding up 70 and 80, and she's trying to calculate how to do it. And then because she was so interested in learning it, it was just so fun.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I could just imagine like how hard it would be to teach teenagers who don't want to learn.
It's different, and it's different when there's a whole class, I'd imagine, as well.
Oh, dude. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. And everyone's like, I remember how much of a smart ass I was back then.
Yeah, they've got too many other interests going on.
Oh, dude, it was just so crazy. And me being the class clown as well, like, oh, dude, it was terrible. I feel sorry for all my teachers, So.
But yeah, and I remember back to Vivian, I remember she was talking about how when they would go on holidays, her dad and mum would just see something interesting on the side of the road and pull over and like have to look at it immediately and like suss it out. And it's interesting because I find like when I just walk around and like look at stuff now, sometimes I walk past something like just a spider, built in a web or something, but I feel like I just have to like stare at it and watch it, and or I like catch myself just walking out, and if it's a really clear night and there's heaps of stars out, just like stopping, kind of looking at them for ages, and trying to see if I can spot some planets and stuff. And I think that's something that I only got a real great appreciation of the more I got into science. Like, you know, you look at a spider's web and you think, oh, that's pretty, or you look at a rose and you think that's pretty, or the stars and stuff. But when you understand kind of more about it, it gives you a greater appreciation of it. It kind of increases it. So I think that was came through in what Vivian was saying too with the parents. It's probably why she was inspired to go into science.
Right. It's you just mentioned something. Go back like 20, 30 seconds ago.
About how...
it was about... it was about appreciating.
So science, like when you understand how something works, that gives you a better appreciation of it. So it enriches your understanding.
Yeah, like in music, cause Alex is a musician and he teaches music as well. And so for him, when he listens to Beethoven or whatever, I bet you appreciate it at a deeper level than I could appreciate it. Someone who hasn't had any musical training.
Yeah.
It's like when people watch, like... in Australia, there's NRL, which is rugby, and I don't watch rugby at all. The only sport that I do watch is mixed martial arts. But I have friends who are in...
The same thing, though, with mixed martial arts. Like, you have a better appreciation of it than someone who doesn't understand
exactly.
it.
Exactly. Especially, like, with martial arts and rugby, is that, you know, people who have trained and are skilled in that craft or art or sport, they see everything that other people don't see. They see the setups, they see the techniques, they see like the difficulty that's involved in the execution, the beauty of the execution of a certain technique. But that only comes by becoming learned in that field, in that specific sport or art or whatever. But when you become a scientist, the beautiful thing is, you appreciate everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can look at a star and recognize, oh, that star may be billions of light years away.
Yeah.
And that light is billions of years old, and it's just reaching me now. You look at the sun, you're like, damn, that's a fusion reactor, you know, something that we can't even create over here. You look at a flower and you recognize, oh, there's the Fibonacci sequence in that. You know, you look at a tree, you know exactly how it's drawing nutrients from the ground and using the sunlight, you know, to drive photosynthesis to create energy. So everywhere you look, it's like there's a masterpiece around you, and so you appreciate it much. You appreciate, I think, the universe and the world at a deeper level than people who don't see all the intricacies and all the details behind what we see.
Yeah, you appreciate it to a greater deal. I guess that's also why I never understand. I hear sometimes, I don't know if you hear it too, but people saying, oh, when you find out how something works, it kind of like just kills the beauty of it. But I don't, like, you know, how somehow as if scientific understanding kind of kills the beauty that you see in nature, but I don't get that.
But who are you hanging out with?
Yeah, I don't know, it's just things I hear online. I think there's this idea that art and beauty are kind of in conflict a little bit with science to some degree, and I don't get it because I just see one as enriching the other and vice versa.
And I think science is, it's a little different from art in that it's pure creation and imagination.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, they're very different. Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
But art, there is rigor involved in science, but in art, like my nephew, like we were doing so he's just starting to learn the guitar. So we were just going through some like A minor chords and E chords and just strumming through that. There's a lot of rigor to teach your fingers to move from one place to another.
Yeah.
There's a lot of repetition that's involved. Whereas in science, man, you could be thinking about something and you come up with an idea. You're like, man, let's figure out a great way to test that idea.
Yeah.
And that's where the creativity lies.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, when people say, oh, science isn't creative, I completely disagree with that. It's very much creative. The fact that we have all this technology and the progression that we've seen in the world is because of creative people who have come up with, you know, ingenious ways of testing and creating stuff. So
I think I agree. I think they're very similar, art and science, in that respect, and they probably differ, whereas art's like an expression of what we feel and how we see the world, and science is kind of attempt to understand the world and the quest for knowledge. But besides that, I think they're very similar in lots of ways.
Very much so. I mean, this is the thing, you can't have art without science. Yeah. So music only sounds good because of the mathematics behind it. Somehow we've been fine-tuned to appreciate music. There's evolutionary, reasons behind it, but there's a science behind music. There's a science behind art. There's mathematical reasons why we find certain things appealing and other things appealing. There's a reason why a piece of music sounds beautiful. Even the human body itself, looking at a face, that's art.
Yeah.
But there's science behind that. There's a Fibonacci sequence running across your face.
Yeah.
So that's why when you get like plastic surgery on your face, it mucks everything up because you throw off that sequence. So there's actually a great YouTube video I was watching the other day, like 10 celebrities that went from instant famous to instant like nothing. And there was one celebrity, dude, I kid you not, there was this one celebrity who made this really good movie, and then for some reason she thought she needed to get plastic surgery, so she fixed up her nose, but the nose wasn't bad before that, man. But what she did was the plastic surgery completely changed the face, so that she had this hit movie, right? And then straight after, no one could recognize her.
Yeah, jeez.
But don't mess with your face, because there's a science behind it, The fact that we find people beautiful, I think there may be something mathematical about that. The fact that we recognize symmetry as something, as being attractive,
Isn't there some study where... Yeah, we've looked at that. We should maybe try and link some in the description for this episode, try and find some. But I think there were some things where even there might have been some psychological things where they measured faces and try and find the most beautiful face, in scare quotes, that humans would have, and they kind of use all those types of features, like mathematical features, by collating lots of different faces that we find beautiful. And yeah, it's interesting.
Symmetry is beautiful.
Yeah.
For some reason, like, we're attracted to that.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing ever.
I found it really interesting, getting back to Vivian, why she didn't get into biochemistry, because both you and I are, I guess, part biochemists.
Dude, I took that on the chin.
Yeah.
I'm telling you. She's like, it just felt like regurgitation. I'm like, oh man, oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'll take that. Thanks, Vivian.
I understand her point. I could see why she would think it was boring, because it is a little bit of like just looking at cycles after cycles. But the reason I liked it is because I kind of like thinking about what life is and why things are alive, and biochemistry is a big part of that, and those cycles are are a big part of what it actually means to be alive. So that's why I like it. But I do see a point.
I think she's right in terms of how it's taught is about regurgitation.
Yeah.
Even at university, I felt like that's the issue with science, man. When you're doing undergrad, there is just so much to learn. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That you have to kind of teach these cycles for people to understand what's coming after them, Like, if you don't understand all the biochemical pathways that are involved in how we harvest our energy, then you can't understand, for example, how metabolism works. So what if I go on a fasting diet, or what if I go on this? If somebody comes with a diet in their mind, I know based on the biochemical pathways what may happen.
Exactly.
So you're able to apply that knowledge. But until you get to that point, it is all memorizing and
like we were talking about before as well, when you understand these biochemical processes, that enriches your understanding of what it means to be alive, and your understanding of what living things are. So kind of adds to the appreciation that you have.
Yeah. So that's just us trying to defend that field.
Yeah. All right. Now that's out of the way. Thanks a lot, Vivian.
No, I think she has a point, and for her, she was more interested in corals, and everybody has a certain path that they follow, certain interests. Things that interest her may not interest us. Although
she gets the last laugh, because she's out in northern Queensland and the US on beaches collecting coral, and we're stuck in a lab looking at test tubes. So she gets the last laugh.
No, we get the last laugh as well at the microbiologists who have to deal with shit bacteria.
Yeah, that's true.
No offense, guys. But, I think we could all hold hands and just bag out microbiology.
I had some notes down here about her research, because I found that really interesting. I don't know how much you want to go into that, because you guys talked about it a lot in the interview, but I thought it was pretty interesting stuff. about how they're finding that coral may be associating with different types of algae that are more heat tolerant due to global warming. That's very interesting, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting in that, first of all, I didn't know that the temperature of the ocean was what was driving these. As Vivian described, you have this coral, which is like soft tissue that are like they are growing in this skeleton structure, which is made out of calcium carbonate, I believe she said.
Yeah.
And then you have these bacteria that go inside the corals in the soft tissue and then almost hang out underneath their skin, and that's what captures the light from the sun and turns that into energy for the coral, and so there's a symbiotic relationship. And interestingly enough, so that's why corals are in places where there's a lot of sunlight, so shallow water, otherwise they won't survive because they need that symbiotic relationship. What did she say? I forgot my point, bro. The point was this, that I had no idea that the temperature itself was the cause for this breakdown of the symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought it'd be carbon dioxide. I thought
I think you mentioned the acidity, the carbon dioxide goes into the water and it makes it more acidic, and it's essentially carbonic acid, which is the same stuff that's in your soft drink.
Yep.
Yeah, you pump soft drinks full of carbon, CO2 to make them fizzy, and they get more acidic. Well, it's the same thing if you pump CO2 into the atmosphere. It increases the amount of carbon in the water and it makes it more acidic.
Does it?
I always...
pumping more...
Yeah, if you
okay, sorry. So it makes... I thought pumping more out of... No, I got confused, but I just keep going. I kind of... Yeah.
Yeah, so because of that acidity, that's why, like you mentioned, that's why I thought a lot of this coral bleaching was occurring. You put that together in your head. But she said, a lot of it, like you mentioned, is due to the temperature rises of the water and these temperature fluctuations. If it gets out of the temperature, the coral gets rid of all of these algae, these symbiotic algae, and then sometimes they don't take them back in. And if they don't take them back in, then they don't get the energy and they just die.
Is it the coral that kicks them out, or the algae just decide to leave?
It could be the algae just decides to leave, yeah.
It's like a relationship.
Wasn't it the coral, because you were talking about the oxygenated meth heads?
Radical oxygen.
Yeah,
species.
that's right.
No, I'm not sure, man. It's like one of those situations. Yeah, bro, I broke up with her first, man. I dumped her. And she tells her friends, no, man, he was an asshole. I broke up with him first.
Everyone's got a safe face.
Hey.
Who is it, the algae or the coral?
It was the global temperatures. I didn't expect that to be one of the causes, but carbon dioxide levels definitely. She mentioned that carbon dioxide actually degrades the foundation that these corals are. So you'll have coral that are growing these skeleton structures, and then they die, and then other coral build on those skeleton structures. A bit like Futurama. Do you remember Futurama when there was old New York City was underground and New York City was above ground?
Yeah, that's right.
It's like that.
Yeah.
So if you imagine, if you knock down old New York City, then the new New York City wouldn't survive. And that's what's happening with the carbon dioxide levels.
Yeah.
But interesting, while global warming is definitely an issue, and this we need to try to mitigate the effects of it. It's interesting how adaptive life is on Earth.
Yeah.
That already, she said that these corals are associating with more heat tolerant bacteria. But she said that the temperatures are fluctuating, and they don't know whether this association is going to be there at a higher permanent temperature. But I thought, wow, like it just shows how amazing life is and its ability to adapt to the environment. Whether these coral and the bacteria are actually going to be able to survive, the temperature rises that I expected to see.
And the other thing is they may only survive in the meantime too. It could get so bad that they end up just dying as well.
And have you seen the pictures of the bleached corals?
Yeah.
Dude, it's sad.
Yeah, it's no good.
It's sad, yeah.
And further on that as well, like I think she did mention on ocean acidification, if that's breaking down this calcium carbonate, that's like a positive feedback loop then, because this calcium carbonate, that's storing effectively a carbon store. So making it more acidic breaks down the calcium carbonate, and we're releasing that carbon store and putting more.
That's so true, because coral do, indeed, in fact, they trap carbon for us.
Yeah.
And if the carbon is being dissolved, then
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, so like
Anyway.
with that issue then of ocean acidification and global warming and things like this, how do you get the public motivated to change it? Because I think Vivian was saying something that she believes, and I agree with her. I think that people have this distance from it. They're not really connected to it because it doesn't directly affect them, so they don't see it as a big problem. Mm-hmm. So it reminded me there's that ethical problem by Peter Singer. Can't remember if I think I have told it to you before. I'll do it again now. So Peter Singer, who's a famous Australian bioethicist, he poses a philosophical ethical problem, which is you're walking home from the shop and you've just bought a nice new pair of jeans, and you're walking past a lake and you look over and you see a boy drowning in the lake. Now here's the dilemma that you have to consider. Do you jump in and save the boy drowning in the lake, thus ruining the new jeans you just bought? Or do you go home and keep your new jeans nice and fresh and clean and leave the boy to drown?
Before anyone thinks that Alex is just crazy for asking that question and thinking, man, how heartless could you be even to consider that? Explain why it's a legit question.
Well, Peter Singer posed it because, jeans maybe cost, say, $70, $80, maybe $100. Yeah.
Well, I buy jeans at $1,000. I don't know. What do you?
So most of the time, when people are confronted, you're just a superstar of fashion.
Yeah, bro.
But when people are confronted with this ethical dilemma, they go, "Well, of course I'm going to jump in and save the kid. What's $100? What's $100 pair of jeans to me? I jump in and I save this boy's life because the problem's right there in front of him and they can see it." But Singer makes the point that right now, there are people dying of starvation in Africa, and if you literally didn't buy a new pair of jeans, you could send that money and quite possibly save someone's life. So the problem is actually right in front of you, but it's just separated by distance, and that's why a lot of people just buy the new jeans.
And so how is that related to global warming?
Well, this is, I guess, the problem that Vivian was bringing up, that people just kind of, even though global warming is a really big problem and it's happening now, people just kind of put it aside and they don't think about it and go on with their lives because it's not right in front of them, directly affecting them, so they don't see it.
I see.
So it's the same problem as that Singer is getting at, where people just ignore the starving child in Africa because it's not right in front of them, even though they would jump in and ruin their new jeans to save that boy drowning immediately without any question.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison. But it's interesting that when you see a drowning kid, it's like you can't walk away with it. You can't walk away.
No one could walk away.
You have the responsibility to save that kid.
Exactly.
If you don't, you're culpable now for not saving that kid.
But are we not culpable for buying a new pair of jeans and helping a starving kid in Africa?
Yeah, but as you said, with global warming and with starvation, with any issue, if you're not looking at it directly, then it's very easy to pretend like you don't have a moral responsibility to do something about it. Yeah. And same with global warming. I mean, we spoke about this, I think with Vivian, I spoke to her, and she said that, in Australia, we may not feel the pressure to go and change our policies, change our approach. Whereas like these small island countries who are literally losing land because the sea levels are rising, they have a completely different opinion on if global warming is real or not, Yeah. So it's when it's in your face, you have to deal with it and you feel obligated to deal with it. But when it's not, then it's like this cognitive dissonance, if I'm not sure if that's the right way to say it. But you disconnect, essentially. You're like, no, I'm not responsible. I can't see it. So it's what I have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a difficult problem. Like, how do you communicate that to people? And I guess that's what the benefit of talking about it more is, and scientists being more vocal about it.
We waterboard people.
Yeah.
It's how it's going to feel if the water levels rise.
Did Trump come up with that policy? I don't know.
Hey, maybe. The new head of EPA. The guy who works for some oil companies or whatever, he's like anti-climate change or whatever. He's going to come and tell us all these green I don't know, man.
Anyway, let's get on to something more positive.
Yeah.
Vivian mentioned that she really wanted to be an academic, which is something that I've found interesting as well, because she loves teaching. I think she mentioned that. She really loves teaching, and that's why she wanted to be an academic, because she can incorporate teaching as part of her research. And I just wondered how much that is to do with her being a scientist as well, because I find, I don't know, for me anyway, that being a scientist, I'm kind of into science and research because I like learning about stuff. And I think when you're into learning about things, you want to teach as well, because you want other people to be interested in learning about stuff. So I wonder if that's the same for her.
For me, that's the case for me.
Yeah.
But I think it may be the same for her. We don't know. I should have asked her that. But she did seem passionate about teaching. Actually, before the conversation, before the interview, her and I were just talking about teaching and marking.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I love everything about teaching. The only thing I don't like is the marking aspect of it. And she's like, yeah, me too. I've been lucky as a postdoc. I get to do all the fun stuff of teaching, which is guest lecturing and talking.
That's
and then
good.
when it comes to the marking, all the academics, like they take care of it.
Yeah.
Like you're in a sweet spot.
Yeah,
So
sounds like something to look forward to.
Yeah.
And she mentioned as well about the constant stress of looking for jobs, which is another thing that kind of sucks about that academic career path. Is like never having a permanent position, or not for a long time, or struggling to get a permanent position, having to deal with casual positions.
Yeah, I actually, listening to her kind of placated some of that stress, because she said usually a postdoc goes for about 3 years.
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about the next job until the third year. So, for 2 years, you're kind of stress-free.
Yeah, that's true.
And then it's just the last year where you have to panic.
I think the good thing about that is that it lets you move around, which is actually something you mentioned earlier on, I think, in the episode, where moving around to different labs helps you diversify your skill. Yeah, that's cool.
And you get to see the world, you get to have fun. But in the meantime, if you have a family or a girlfriend or a wife, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Unless you're willing to bring them, everywhere you go. But, I could see how it could be difficult for someone who's trying to establish a family, and trying to be a postdoc at the same time, and knowing that, this is my last year of this postdoc, I have to find another job. Hopefully, yeah. And she mentioned actually, buying a house is an issue for instance. If you're, and the trick is, when you're an undergrad, obviously you don't get paid. A postgrad, PhD, you get some scholarship money if you're doing it right. If you're doing research right and you're excelling. But when you reach a PhD, typically, I'm about 27 now. The next stage is a postdoc, but a couple of postdocs in, you reach the age where you want to settle down and have a family and buy a house, and you don't get that opportunity because of the insecurity of the job. You can't double down and say, yeah, I want to buy a $400,000, $500,000 house if you're making $80,000 a year for like 2 years for sure, and then the third year, like, I got to find another place. And so it's definitely, I think that this type of job is suitable for people who don't want to anchor down just yet. It's, for me specifically, I think for me it's perfect.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in the same place twice. I want to go to a few different places, see the world, and get paid, even though the pay is like pennies.
Research, I think, is a good career path for that anyway as well, Yeah.
Academia is definitely hard
Yeah,
to
it's
get
a hard
into.
road. Yeah.
That's why,
But like we saw with Brittany last week, that's just one career path available from research anyway, because she was trying to use her research career to maybe go into like something like detective or with the police force.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
The pathway to becoming academic may be much more competitive and difficult to get into now.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that's the only pathway or the only thing that's available.
Exactly.
There's a lot outside,
And it's not a job that everyone would probably want anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably good that not everyone wants it.
Yeah.
There's probably some antisocial scientists who can't deal with talking to people. All they want to do is just be in the lab and do the experiments and contribute that way. You don't want to force those people to start talking to students and losing their shit.
That'd be funny. Exactly.
Thanks for listening to Blab Codes. Rate and review our podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast, because it does help us spread the word. And if you like what we're doing here, then help us grow it by sharing this with a friend of a friend, or your mailman, even your mailman's mailman. We also want to hear from you, so send us questions or comments to blabcodes@gmail.com. And if you have any interesting questions or comments, then we'll talk about it on air.